So we'll start from where we started from last week. So my son-in-law is using these to make hair ornaments for our Rukmini, she said proudly, showing us the jewels. They are beautiful, I exclaimed with eyes open wide. Never had I seen such exquisite gems before. She smiled. They are nothing compared to the Sayamantaka gem. You have seen that gem? Asked Udab in surprise. It was known to be a magical gem that could produce gold. She nodded. It is a long story, but I will tell you, as there's nothing I enjoy more than sharing the stories of our Rukmini. I shifted uncomfortably in the hope of conveying to Udab that we would not stay long, but he seemed not to notice, and was eagerly waiting for her to begin. She started to narrate. Before our Rajakumari got married, she came to see me in Vidarbha. She knew that Sri Krishna would come and she would be spared from the arranged marriage with Shishupala Maharaj. But she also knew that she would not be the only wife of Sri Krishna, and this was something she had to consider. When she came to me, she didn't bring up the subject, but I knew what it was on her mind, and so I advised her. Rajakumar, look into your heart and see who these other wives are. They are already known to you and beloved by you. Am I right? Daddy paused and then asked with a small laugh, who was I to say this? There was nothing she didn't know, but she liked to think of me as a seer of Vidarbha, and so I played along. After they were married, Sri Krishna built Rukmini the most beautiful palace on the island, in the sea, off the coast here, which is a royal residence, as you know. But she felt confined and wanted the freedom to move about as she wished. Sri Krishna, on the other hand, felt the call of some of his devotees and knew that their past actions had earned them a position of being his wives. He asked to seek Rukmini's permission, and so he came to speak with her. But he was a little anxious. She would have to agree before he could take additional wives. But she also had to get his permission for something she wanted to ask. So they were each a little cautious. He spoke first and told her that although in their previous incarnation she had only been his wife, it would be different this time. She nodded and replied that she also had a request to make, that she not be confined to the palace or to any royal duties. In her past birth, she had left the palace to travel freely through the forest. This time she would not wander in the forest, but wander through the markets and villages among the people, and desired to be free of all interference. He promised her total freedom and said that he would never question any of her actions, and she agreed that he could take as many wives as he saw fit. Now you wonder, what does this have to do with the Sam Sayamantaka gem? She asked with a sparkle in her eyes. Olive nodded, but I glanced around looking for any means of escape. Hearing stories of Rukmini only made me think of my mother, something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I'm coming to the part of the story I assume you know about the bear-like person named Jambavan who helped Sri Rama during the battle against Ravana. At the mention of Sri Ram, my attention returned to her, and this time Uddhav and I both nodded. He was a burly character, she continued with enormous strength. The war had awakened such intense anger in him that after the war he vowed not to depart this world until he had fully neutralized his rage. With Sri Ram's guidance, even after Ram left his body, he moved from cave to cave, meditating for hundreds and then thousands of years. But still his tremendous anger aroused by the war did not abate. One day, as he was shifting to a new cave, he found a young girl crying and alone in the forest. Either she had been abandoned or her parents had died. Jambavam adopted her and took her with him as he traveled from cave to cave. While he sat in meditation, He played with various things that she found. And as she grew older, she collected foods from the forest and prepared meals for him. She became known as Jambavati. When he was not in meditation, he told her stories of Sri Ram and Mata Sita, and she began to devote herself to them, spending hours and days in meditation herself. Mata Sita would appear to Jambavati when she was young, and that is how she came to know and love her. How is that possible? Interrupted Uddhav. Sri Ram and Sita Devi died so long ago. Died, she asked. Is it possible for them to die? Uddhav and I exchanged doubtful glances but listened as she continued. Now I have to pause that story and shift to another one. It is a bit more complicated, but these two stories tie together. There is a very important minister in Sri Krishna's government called Satrajit. He is the court treasurer and is a bit too fond of gold and gems. A greedy man, you might say. My son-in-law has created many pieces of jewelry for his family. Love of wealth is his weakness, and Sri Krishna and our Rukmini saw this and sought to help him overcome his greed. One of Satyajit's redeeming qualities is his great devotion to Surya Dev, the sun deity. One day, when he was walking through a field by his home, he found the Sayamantaka gem lying there, sparkling in the sun with a divine radiance, and he thought it was a gift from Surya Dev. Actually, it was our Rukmini who had created that jewel as part of her and Sri Krishna's Leela, divine play, to help the treasurer overcome his greed. When Satyajit found it, he was beside him with joy. He was sure there was nothing like it on earth and thought that Suryadev was favoring him with this remarkable gift. He brought it to my son-in-law to confirm that it wasn't a natural gem. I was visiting my daughter at that time, and as soon as I saw the gem, I knew that it was a part of Sri Krishna and our Rukmini's Leela. When Satyajit told Sri Krishna what he had found, Sri Krishna suggested that he give this precious gem to Ugrasena, the king of Mathura, who was also Sri Krishna's grandfather and the head of the Yadava clan. But Satyajit refused and coveted the gem, not letting anyone else see it. Whenever he had to leave Dwaraka, he told his brother Rasena to guard the gem carefully and not take it out of its secret place for any reason. On one occasion, when Satyajit was traveling, Rasena decided to go hunting in the forest and, unwilling to leave the gem unguarded, he took it with him. Sadly, while he was in the forest, a lion killed him and dragged his dead body along with the jewel into a nearby cave where he thought he could enjoy his meal. Jambavan happened to be meditating in that cave, and the commotion drew him out of his deep inner absorption. Concerned that the lion might harm Jambavati, he quickly killed the animal, and then noticing the jewel lying on the floor of the cave, he handed it to his daughter. Once Satyajit returned from his travels, he heard that his brother had been killed while hunting. Thinking of the gemstone, he quickly went to retrieve it, but found it missing. He was more aggrieved by the disappearance of this gem than by the death of his brother. Recalling that Sri Krishna had suggested that he give the gem to Ugrasena, Satyajit went to see Krishna and angrily accused him of stealing the gem for his grandfather. Sri Krishna knew exactly what had happened because he had created the Leela, but he played along. He knew that Prasanna's karma had determined his death during his hunting expedition, and Sri Krishna had decided to test the treasurer who had too much love for his wealth. Sri Krishna also knew where Jambavan was meditating, as he himself had drawn him to the spot so he could finally grant him moksha, liberation. He told Satyajit that he himself would go in search of the gem. Sri Krishna went to the spot where Prasanna had been killed and followed the bloody tracks the lion had left, which led to the cave where Jambavan and Jambavati were staying. But he went in disguise, pretending that he had come to fetch the jewel. When he arrived at the cave, Jambavan's mind was disturbed by the act of killing the lion, so he did not recognize his lord. Seeking to protect his daughter and the jewel, which he had already fallen in love with, he resisted Sri Krishna's request for the gem and began to fight with him. They battled for days. It was Sri Krishna's way of helping him release the last of his anger. While they were fighting, Mata Sita appeared before Jambavati and asked, "Is your love for this gem greater than your love for me?" When Jambavati cried out loud, "No, there is nothing greater love than my love for you," Mata Sita replied, "Then leave this gem and come with me." The young girl immediately got up to follow her. At that moment, the last bit of anger and illusion was released from Jambavan. He recognized who it was that he had been battling. He fell at the feet of Sri Krishna, who had now taken his own form, and he pleaded for moksha, asking that his daughter to be taken into Sri Krishna's care. That is how Jambavati came to be the second wife of Sri Krishna. I don't know who she loves more, her husband or our Rajakumari. She is devoted to Rukmini as she is to him. Returning to the palace with the jewel, Sri Krishna gave it back to Satyajit, who was most remorseful that he accused Sri Krishna of stealing it. He pleaded with Sri Krishna to keep the jewel and to take his 3 daughters and wives to compensate for the insult. What nobody knows is that before the incident, Rukmini had gone to Sri Krishna and said to him, "Because of the way our marriage came to be, I brought no wealth to Dwarka. I'll create a magnificent gem which will bring the daughters of Satyajit to us and wealth as well." Sri Krishna had simply laughed and replied, "You say you have brought no wealth when you are wealth itself. What wealth exists that you have not created, my dear?" When Jambavati came into the palace, she brought humility, a deep sense of service. You would think that she was the attendant of Rukmini, the way she serves her. But with Satyabhama, the oldest daughter of Satyajit, who was Sri Krishna's third wife, it was another matter. She comes from a family that flaunts its wealth, and it is the very embodiment of pride. That is a story unto itself. Dadi ended her tale with a broad smile. I had to admit that despite my resistance, I had fully been engrossed in her narrative and had completely forgotten about time. It was Uddhav who said it was getting late and we had to return. Please thank your mother and ask her to visit before I return to Vidarbha in a few months. Uddhav nodded and thanking Dadi for the time she had spent with us. We both touched her feet respectfully before taking our leave. It was nearly dark when we re entered the streets, but I hardly noticed. Uddhav suggested that we take the long way home so that we could walk by the sea. And even though it was out of the way, I agreed. I had so enjoyed this time of escape from my home environment, and I was anxious about returning. Olaf, how much of that story do you believe? I asked hesitantly. All of it, he replied in surprise. Don't you believe it? You believe that Rukmini created that gemstone and that Jambavan has lived for thousands of years and that Sita Devi actually came to Jambavati. You think all of that is true? It is strange about Jambavan, but maybe he didn't keep the same body. I've heard stories of sages who, when their bodies age, just sort of leap into another body, he replied pensively. But my mother has told me similar stories. She has always said that Rukmini is not an ordinary person. He replied assuredly. She really believes that Rukmini was Mata Sita in her previous birth. Who are we to say otherwise, Malini? My mother believes the same, I slowly replied, wincing that I mentioned my mother. Would have noticed, but I can't accept anything my mother said. Asking me to sit with him on a low wall, he tried to console me. Malani, I know your situation. We all know it. I don't believe your mother is a bad person or she meant to hurt you. I think she had her own reasons for doing what she did. She fell in love with another man and that is why she left, I replied bitterly. No, I don't think that was it. I don't think she would have left for that reason. I think it was something else, that she was pushed into a corner, he replied gently. I don't want to speak about my mother. We were both quiet for a few moments, and then I asked, how is that you dare speak with me, spend time alone with me, and are you not afraid of Mahendra? Malini, I like you a lot. It pains me to see how isolated you are, and to see the way Mahendra looks at you. I want to help you get out of his grip if I can. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to me in this way, not since Abhishek had been ripped away. Had I heard any comforting words? I just don't want to get in trouble, I replied quietly. For the first time in so many years, I felt a sense of freedom, of being able to be myself. If you will agree, then let us meet from time to time. We can meet here by the sea. My father watches me closely. I don't know how I can get away. Let us come up with a signal then, he replied with a smile. When your father goes out to do an errand, come by my home and give a tap at the back window. I'll come and meet you here. It is only a short distance from where we live. I nodded and smiled at him. Come, let's go home quickly before your father gets suspicious. When I returned to the house, my father was seated in a corner, as he so often was, with an empty expression on his face. I was afraid he would be angry, but he was too weak and defeated these days to show much anger. He asked where I had been, and I replied I had gone to bring some sweets to the seer of Vidarbha. You know her? He asked in surprise. I heard from one of the women here that she is visiting her daughter. And since Amma spoke so much about her, I thought I should meet her. I thought you wanted to dissociate yourself from anything to do with my mother. I, anything to do with your mother, he replied suspiciously. I do, Pitaji, but I wanted to meet her this one time. I was afraid Mahendra had taken you, he replied sorrowfully. You mustn't go anywhere without telling me. I'm sorry, Pitaji, truly I am. I'm getting older and can take better care of myself. Yes, you're getting older, and the day of your marriage is getting closer. Let's not talk about it, Pitaji. I made a simple meal and then went to bed. As I lay there, I rested in quiet joy as I recalled the beautiful large eyes of Uddhav, his gentle glances and graceful manner. Uddhav was one of the dancers I admired the most. When I had the occasion to be partnered with him, the dance came alive and flowed so easily. I had often wondered if he felt the same attraction that I did. Now I knew what ending we would have, I couldn't imagine, but it was enough for now that he was in my life. As I lay there, an image of my mother came before me, and I remembered her telling the story of how she had helped our Rajakumari escape from the guards in the market. She had told my mother that she would one day return the favor and help her escape danger. Could it have been Rukmini who helped my mother to run away? Why would she have done that? That could not be, I murmured to myself as I drifted to sleep. Chapter 3, A Secret Marriage. Several years passed, and Uddhav and I continued to meet secretly whenever we could manage, and escape from the watchful eyes of my father and Mahendra. We lived in a bubble that consisted of just two of us, not daring to think of the future. Most often we would meet in the stillest of hours of the night by the sea. When there was not a creature in sight. On one such occasion, Uddhav asked me to dance with him. I danced my mother and her partner, Mohit had created to portray Sri Krishna and Mata Sita on their last night together in Panchavati before her capture by Ravana, the king of the demons. I had performed it many times at Mahendra's insistence despite my reluctance, but never with Uddhav. It was well past midnight and we were talking along the seashore. I didn't respond to his request but kept walking. Seeing my hesitation, he caught hold of my arm, causing me to pause, and said quietly, It reminds you of your mother, I know, I nodded. It's been a long time, Malini. Perhaps it's time to let go of your anger. If she hadn't abandoned me, we wouldn't be in this situation, Uddhav. We could have married openly. We don't truly know what made her leave. Remember the good about her, not only the bad things. It is a beautiful dance, and I want us to do it together here, where only Sri Ram and Mata Sita can see us. Touched by his request, I nodded and began to hum the notes of the music. Stepping away from him with the leap of my arms and formation of my hands into a series of mudras, I guided my legs to flow with the rhythm of the waves. As we danced the parts, the poses took on new meaning, and I expressed my love through every movement. Never had I poured so much love, so much of myself into that dance. After we had finished with a joyful laugh, Uddhav drew me down onto sand with him, embracing me tightly. It was the first time he had done so, and it felt so good, so right, to be in his arms. But then I pulled away and whispered, Uzo, we must get married first. Brushing his lips against my cheek, he told me that he would find a way. The hard work that Mahendra had subjected was finally paying off. Then I became the most visible dancer in our community, traveling to far-off villages and towns, performing the homes of many Kshatriya families, and now was the main attraction. Many people who had known my mother kept comparing me to her, complimenting me for having her talent. But this brought me no joy or comfort. It seemed I was unable to escape her shadow, which kept creeping into my life. And as much as I tried to bury her memory, it refused to stay hidden. My mother had become known for performing the part of Mata Durga in her battle with the demon Mahishasura. It was a great role I greatly resisted, but Mahendra was determined to make me my mother's replacement, and in the end, I had no choice. This became my most frequently performed role, the one people most often asked to see. Adav had also become a known performer, and so we were together day and night. When in the company of others, we were careful not to speak to one another or even exchange glances. I don't know how we managed to contain our growing affection, but we knew that our lives depended on controlling the outward display of our feelings. One day, Udav informed me that Dadi had come back to visit her daughter, and it might be her last visit. He was eager to see her. I was less enthusiastic, but recognized the opportunity to spend time with him, and so we agreed to meet close to where Dadi was staying. You are still doubting Dadi's stories, he commented, teasingly poking me. As we walked down the narrow lane that led to Dadi's daughter's home, I affirmed. You are stubborn, Malini. How am I stubborn? Just because you are angry at your mother, you reject everything she stood for, everything she loved and believed in. He said in a more serious tone. I didn't answer him. He stopped walking and looked at me. How I wish I could heal the pain of losing your mother, of needing to push away the things you know deep inside to be true. I just asked you to keep an open mind. Don't cling to your anger. I hardly think of my mother anymore, Udav, I replied slowly. I know you, Malini. I know you very well by now. You may try to hide your pain from the world, but you can't hide it from me. Because your mother so loved Rukmini Devi, you have closed your heart to her and to everyone and everything that reminds you of your mother. That is your stubbornness. Come, let's go and meet Dadi, I said, changing the subject. I'll keep an open mind. Dadi received us warmly. Her face was no more lined than when I had last seen her some years earlier, because there was no more space on her face for new lines to be drawn. But her steps were slower and her figure was more bent. After we were seated, Udav asked her how she had met Rukmini Devi. Involuntarily, I stiffened when he asked this question, as I understood his purpose. He wanted me to hear more stories of her in the hope of opening my heart. My meeting with her goes far back in time. Do you want to hear the beginning of that story? Uddhav nodded eagerly, but I remained expressionless. Well, it began many lifetimes ago, during the time of Sitama. I was a young girl, preparing for my marriage ceremony, when my mother took me to get the blessing of her Gurudev. He was the one where Ma was living when she retreated to the forest to raise her children. Before we reached the hermitage, our chariot was attacked by men with a grudge against my father. My mother and I were injured, and we were carried to Sitama's cottage, where she healed us both. At that time, she suppressed the memory of what happened to me. Daddy paused briefly, and her eyes clouded over, as if recalling that incident, and then she began. I had been severely injured, violated multiple times, and would have died had Sita Mata not healed me. Had she not suppressed my memory of that horrible event, I would have taken my life in despair. But she did heal me, and I married and had children and a happy life. I visited Sita Ma again before she left her body. I had asked her what had truly happened to me during the roadside accident. She did not tell me all the details, but she revealed that I had been gravely injured. Then she said, there are laws of men and the laws of the universe. The laws of men do not always provide justice, but the universe never fails to do so. Trust in that. No person can escape their due, but you should not be the cause of their suffering, because then you'll incur a debt and the cycle will continue. Her words sank deep into my mind. I lived the rest of my life well and then died. A few more lives, I took birth as a man. There had a family that created much trouble for my family. One of the daughters of this family caused the death of my sister. This woman was spiteful and mean and had been envious of that sister, whom I was close. Her death was painful for me. One day, when I was riding my horse through a forest, I came across that woman. She had fallen from her horse and was slightly injured. Now you can have your revenge. Something inside of me said, now you can have your revenge. Kill her, nobody will know who did it. Or violate her so that she'll fall into great despair. I stood there wavering and was about to kill her when the words came to my mind. The laws of men do not always provide justice, but the universe never fails to do so. You should not be the cause of suffering, but then you will incur debt. I stopped as if paralyzed when those words emerged in my mind. After wavering for a few more moments, I helped the woman back onto her horse and then rode away. My anger over my sister's death dissolved. The woman had much pain in her later years, but it wasn't because of anything I did. I was spared from committing a terrible deed for which I would have to pay price. Sitama's words had sunk deep into my mind, and I had carried this teaching into my succeeding births. Now I come to my current life. In my early years growing up in Vidarbha, I was friends with the daughter of a family who lived close to us. We lived in a community of gem carvers and jewelry makers. This girl had a harder life than I. She had a disability, but she was very kind to me, always seeking to help me in any way she could. We grew up, we got married, and remained friends, raising our children together. She continued to assist me with anything I needed. If I wanted something from the market, she would insist on doing the errand for me. This is how my friend was, always looking to see what she could do for me. I reached middle age. When our young Rajakumari came to see the jewelry makers in Vidarbha, it was then I met her for the first time. My sight had already opened, and I was seeing many things about people. When our Rajakumari came to visit, my friend was there as well, and the young Kumari watched as we chatted with this woman, who had been my close companion since childhood. She watched as my friend insisted on serving us tea and snacks she had made, and she kept asking if there was anything more she could do. I was even a bit embarrassed that she was serving me so ardently. At one point, our Raja Kumari asked to see me alone outside. As we, s- uh, as we sat together, she broke into a joyous laughter. Then she whispered to me, I am so glad to see friendship now. All has finally been resolved. At her words, my memory awakened, and I saw that this woman, who was my dearest friend, had been one of the two men who had long ago had violated me and was also the one I had nearly killed in a subsequent life. I almost fainted from shock because I had refrained from killing that woman, and because that person fully regretted the violence and committed against me in the earlier birth. She was drawn to be born near me and seek friendship now. Our Rajakumari then spoke the same words that Sita Ma had spoken to me about justice. I know she had transformed the soul, turned a mean spirited being into a very kind, caring one. Whether we call her Sita or Rukmini, it doesn't matter. She is the Supreme Mother who watches over and silently guides her children. You see, we all play so many roles during our many lifetimes. Sometimes we are the hero, sometimes the villain. We mustn't hold on to anger or judgment because the person we hate may be our savior in future life. But she paused and I looked over at Uddhav, who was so fully engaged and hanging on to her every word. But I was still doubtful. How could Rukmini have known about the incident of so long ago? How could Dadi have forgiven a man who had committed such an atrocious act? It seemed a bit unreal to me. Daddy, were you still able to remain friends with that woman after you saw the past? Uddhav finally ventured to ask. Daddy laughed, of course, until the very end, until she died. She was no longer the person who had harmed me, and I was no longer the victim. Over many lifetimes she had suffered and received her due, growing and learning the way as had I. The universe is most generous. It gives us multiple opportunities to heal our pain. It was our Rajakumari who helped me regain my composure that day, and she taught me how to understand and control the things I see of past and future events. She taught me what to say and what not to say. There are things that should not be shared. Dadi, that is an amazing story, exclaimed the one with so many lessons. It shows how we really can judge people. He turned to me as he spoke those words, but I looked away, looking away, knowing his intent. Then she looked into Uddhav's eyes for quite a while, and then quietly spoke words that seemed to be meant for him alone. There are people who make great sacrifices for the sake of love. I know you are such a person, and the reward for such sacrifice is great. He gazed back at her without responding. Daddy, could I speak with you alone? I suddenly asked. The thought had entered my mind that just in case it was true, she could read the future. Perhaps she could tell me whether my marriage to Mahendra would take place. I didn't want Uddhav to be there in the event that she affirmed I was destined for this marriage. Daddy nodded and Uddhav said he would wait outside. After he left, she asked, "What do you want to ask, child?" "When I was young, my father committed me to marry the head of our community, a hateful man named Mahendra. I want to know if I am destined to marry him." She closed her eyes and was silent for some time. Emerging from meditation, she smiled and said, "Your mother is gone, but our Rukmini will bring her back to you one day. You'll find a long-lost sister and another mother who long ago you rejected. Our Rukmini will help you unite with them to bring closure to that past." That was not what I wanted to hear, and so I pressed her. "What about the marriage to Mahendra?" "There will be an unfinished matter with him that will be left for the future." I'd been looking at her, but now I looked away. I didn't want to hear about the past or future, but about the present. Seeking my impatience, she sighed. "No, my child, that marriage will not take place, but another one will." I thought I detected a note of sadness in her voice, but her words were exactly what I wanted to hear. Breaking into a broad smile, I thanked her and took my leave. Once aside, Uddhav asked me what Dadi and I had spoken about. I asked her whether I would marry Mahendra. I replied. "What did she say?" he asked anxiously. "She told me some things," I replied slowly in a teasing voice. "What things?" I could sense his anxiety rising. "Malini, you must tell me. This concerns our future." That's the end of today's book reading session. We'll continue on next week.